I'm Jacob Soboroff. You're watching HuffPost Live. Here's a fun question for us to ponder today. How and when will humans as a species go extinct? Will it be a global nuclear war? A galaxy collision 6 billion years from now? Self-aware robots? Or, as we were reminded recently with the meteorite in Russia, will it be an asteroid crashing into Earth like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs? Clearly, I've gotten most of my disaster scenario imagery from Hollywood movies, but we've assembled some experts in the field to tell us actually how it really might go down. Joining us now to talk about the end of the world as we know it, we've got Ray Villard, news director for the Hubble Space Telescope, Nick Bostrom, director of the Future of Humanity Institute, James Hughes, executive director at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and George Dvorsky, producer of the Sentient Developments blog. Welcome to all of you.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Guys, let's start out by talking about the recent meteorite that landed in Russia. Here's a clip from one of the many YouTube videos that captured the event. So as we take a look at this, James, let me start with you. Was this meteorite landing a wake-up call in your opinion? People were obviously very captivated by this as they saw it around the world.
I think it was a wake-up call, and it's been great to see all the discussion of asteroid deflection and asteroid monitoring that's been inspired by this recent meteor and the flyby of another asteroid. However, I have been reassured in my research over the years that recently astronomers have cataloged most of the asteroids that are larger than a kilometer in the solar system. Now, there may still be some dark objects out there, but it's the larger than a kilometer ones that are really civilization-ending asteroids. So I'm more anxious about other catastrophic and existential risks to humanity, although something less than a kilometer could still do a tremendous amount of damage.
For instance, what are the other ones that you're concerned about?
Well, things like super volcanoes, because we don't have any strategy for mitigating if the Yellowstone caldera were to go off again, for instance. It would probably be a severely damaging to human civilization event. There are few that are truly, and Nick can address this, and George as well, but there are a few that are truly civilization ending, like global climate change is not. It'll probably do us some damage, but something like a super volcano probably could.
I want to go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Did somebody want to jump in there?
Just again, very little to disagree with in terms of what James had to say, but when it comes to the natural hazards, the natural risks, we need to be a bit cautious, I think, when comparing them, let's say, to potential human-instigated disasters. If you take, for example, the collision from an asteroid, we are talking about near cosmological scale events, the kind of things that we can measure across the span of millions upon millions of years, not the kind of thing that we necessarily have to worry about happening next week or the next several years. Mind you, there always is that freakish possibility that we could have a severe impact, at some point soon. But again, the probability of it certainly is disproportionate relative to some of the more pressing risks that I'm sure we'll get to later on in this conversation.
Yeah, before we do get to human-instigated disasters, George, what do you think is the most probable non-man-made or natural threats to humanity? What do you think is the most likely scenario to happen? And is there a way to actually sort of calculate this?
Definitely, I'm concerned, as James is, about Yellowstone and that the caldera. The land is literally rising at a measurable rate on a yearly basis, and the pressure is building, and it could go off relatively soon. Certainly, what they're saying, we're not talking millions of years in terms of the scale, but certainly something much more again, earlier than that. So that's my, I would say, in terms of a natural disaster, I'd be more worried about supervolcanoes than I would be, let's say, asteroids.
Climate change was mentioned by James. Ray, let me turn to you. After the way, sort of, not to be cynical, but after the way we've treated our planet, do we deserve to, this is sort of a dark question, but to continue on as a species? We haven't exactly been particularly respectful of Mother Earth. Oh, you're muted. If you jump up into the upper right-hand corner, click the button that looks like a microphone or little
I'm
red
sorry,
button.
this
There you go.
reset itself. We're really just tenants. Earth is 5 billion years old. And humans have been here, for less than 1 million years. This planet will become uninhabitable as the sun evolves. in about 1 billion years. In terms of asteroids, it's interesting. The dinosaurs got a wake-up call 100 million years ago. A giant asteroid hit the moon and made the Tycho crater, which you can almost see with the naked eye. They had 40 million years to figure out how to save the Earth, and they didn't because they weren't a technological intelligent species. Asteroids are like buses. They do come along, and the frequency, the amount of power they're going to do, of course, increase. As that power increases, the frequency of that drops. But a humanity killer asteroid could easily come within the next 100 million years. A city killer class asteroid comes along every 100 to 200 million years. The last, prior to this Russian explosion a couple weeks ago, there was the Great Tunguska event of 1908. If that had fallen over Washington, it would have destroyed millions of people. New York, it would have wiped out 10 million people. So this is an ongoing threat. We do need to find out how to preserve our species because more of these things are going to come along. But in terms of the total evolution of Earth, I'd say we're just tenants. All these cosmic forces out there are going to get us sooner or later if we don't do ourselves in first.
Nick, let me turn to Nick here. Nick, what do you see as the biggest threat to our species at this point? And I'll open it up. If you want to include man-made potential disasters, go for it.
Yes, I think all the really big threats to the survival of the human species over the next 100 years are man-made, arising in one way or another out of human activities. And there's an easy way to see that. We have survived all manner of threats from nature for 100,000 years. And if asteroids and volcano eruptions and diseases and firestorms and earthquakes haven't done us in the past 100,000 years, they are unlikely to do us in within the next 100 years. By contrast, we will in this century start to introduce entirely new kinds of risk, arising particularly from future technological discoveries that we might make in this century. And it's clear that that's the category where all the really big existential risks reside.
Talking about existential, risks, concepts, when we talk about the future, Nick, talk a little bit about the singularity and how we should look at the singularity in the context of having this conversation.
Well, the word singularity has been used in many different senses. So it's important to pick out the particular meaning of the term that we're interested in. I think the interesting part of the concept of the singularity is this idea of greater than human intelligence. The idea that we might build machines one day that exceed us in general intelligence, in general smartness and inventiveness, just as we exceed the intelligence of chimpanzees or other primates. And for precisely the same reason that humans have achieved our dominant position here on this planet by being smarter than other animals, it's plausible that if we built machines that were much smarter than us, that were super intelligent, that they too might be extremely powerful and be able to shape the future. So depending on the values of those machines, you might then have very desirable outcomes or you might have very catastrophic outcomes. I think that's the interesting part of the singularity idea. Now, it has been used in other senses as well as denoting some general claim that technology is growing exponentially.
Right.
I think that's a quite separate idea.
So, but in this case, the one you're talking about, that we may see a robot that, may one day supersede human intelligence and possibly even our species. Anybody that's seen a Terminator movie, and Ray, let me turn to you for this, wants to know the answer to the question, when are robots going to come and kill all of us?
Well, the speculation over aliens invading Earth has been very popular. The problem is there's really nothing here that we want unless they consider us a threat, which they wouldn't. I do believe that if we do come in contact with extraterrestrial intelligent life, it will be a machine. It will not be something evolved from flesh and blood as we are. And an interesting test of this hypothesis, how we might evolve, we've been looking for signals from intelligent life for over the past 50 years.
So do we have a tendency, Ray, to exaggerate these existential threats, do you think?
What, the alien invasion?
Alien invasion, singularity, robots that are going to kill us.
You can never say anything's impossible. You can say it's improbable.
You're freaking me out, Ray.
You cannot predict the future at all. I would say if aliens were going to invade us, they would have come here by now. But the fact that we don't have signals from other civilizations means that either they die out, the robots supersede them and they don't care about us, or the robots are taking over the galaxy and they just have passed us by.
Let me bring it back. Let me bring it back to today, and I want to turn back to James. James, my understanding is you describe yourself as a bit of a prepper. Realistically and seriously, what do you think, man-made or natural, what do you think we should do? What do you think we should have on hand to, prepare ourselves in case of a catastrophe?
Well, just to address the previous question,
Sure.
I do think there's a serious problem with our capacity for thinking rationally about these kinds of risks. We have a deep well of psychological and cultural baggage to approach the thinking about these risks with either apocalyptic or millennialist expectations. The future is either going to be manna from heaven or it's going to be the Terminator and so forth. And trying to kind of think about the ways that we can muddle through is very difficult. In terms of being a prepper, I fault Nick actually for this, because Nick was the one who wrote the existential risks paper 10 years ago that got me and a lot of other people thinking about these questions. And when we started to actually look at all the different kinds of catastrophic risks, and even though each one is less than 1% of any kind of possibility, you add them all together and it does add up to something substantial being problematic. So I do have a 3-month supply of Spam in the basement and plenty of water and et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, I'm sorry you've chosen Spam, by the way. There's got to be like beef jerky or something that's a little more tasty.
Spam lasts 10 years in the can.
I would second what James said about the huge difficulties in trying to think rationally about threats to the human species. It immediately slides into science fiction or theology or an arena where people feel free just to make stuff up. It's surprising how little serious academic research there has actually been on this question, despite it's unarguably important. We did a literature
Nick,
survey.
I actually have a question about that.
Ago.
Do you think, Nick, that all these Hollywood disaster movies and our propensity to sort of sensationalize all of this in pop culture, movies about AI, artificial intelligence, are they hurting sort of our real world chances of mitigating these type of threats?
On balance, probably they do. They might increase interest and concern, but they come with so many distortions and limitations. Look, if you want to sell a movie script or indeed a novel, you've got to have a storyline. It introduces all kinds of good story biases. You want to have human protagonists that play a central role. If there is a robot army, then maybe they need to have machine guns, and at the end, the human hero needs to come at the last moment and defeat them. All of which is completely right angle to any plausible scenario. If you imagine a scenario where nothing happened and then suddenly we went extinct and nothing more happened after that, it would make a really, really boring story. But it's a whole lot more plausible than the kind of Terminator scenario where we are fighting off robots with machine guns.
I would even say, if I could interject, that
Please.
even the term singularity as well has been an incredible distraction, and it's also turned a lot of people off from, I think, the tremendous hazard that we are facing. What it's really turned into is a kind of Rorschach test for people. They project both their fears and their longings in terms of what they imagine the future will be like, particularly if there is going to be a greater than human and a so-called super artificial intelligence come into being. And in fact, if you ask anyone to give you their definition of the singularity, they'll give you something different. Everybody's got their own different take on what it is. I personally, over the last several months, have refrained from using the term. I don't use it when I talk about the future of artificial intelligence, and I've pulled it out of my writing as well. And what it's done, it's actually forced me to be more articulate and more specific as to what I'm talking about, because I can no longer be vague and just talk about this ephemeral thing that's known as the singularity. Mm-hmm. And what I've replaced it with are discussions about the onset of obviously artificial intelligence, but even particular kinds of artificial intelligence. I think Nick is clearly focused on, again, a real kind of general, highly generalized artificial intelligence, and I think that's obviously very important. But one of the things that I'm concerned about is the kind of the outliers to this. I personally believe that the most dangerous period facing humanity will be in the few years leading up to a kind of fully mature SAI that Nick speculates about. I think these are the ones that are going to cause.
Sorry, for those that don't know, what is an SAI?
That's just a short term for artificial superintelligence. What Nick was describing as being an AI that's vastly superior in terms of its not just its intelligence, But most importantly, I think, in terms of its speed, this is not anything that we can even remotely relate to and catch up with and comprehend in terms of how efficiently it's going to be going about its thinking processes and acting upon them. But what I fear is what will happen just prior to this, some kind of an AI accident. And I think, for example, we've already seen some signs of this. If you look, for example, at how stock trading is done
absolutely.
these days, it's done completely by artificial agents working at millisecond speeds. And we are basically just standing back and watching things happen. And there have been micro crashes and micro trends that we still, even years afterwards, are not understanding exactly what happened. And I worry that, scale this up, and it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to the economy, but let's say perhaps that we have an artificial intelligence take care of the grid or take care of our information infrastructure or even our military establishment. I mean, the day is coming when we are going to turn over our military thinking and decision making.
Well,
to
in
AI
some
agents.
respect, I mean, we've heard a lot, in the conflict between Palestinians and Israel about the Golden Dome missile defense system, and I know that that's probably a not particularly advanced form of artificial intelligence, but
you're right.
You're
right. You're right to speculate that eventually that these machines will be turned over to something much quicker and much more reactive than, let's say, the human decision making. I mean, we are agonizingly slow. We have Paleolithic brains, and we're talking now about warfare in the digital era, and this will absolutely be a problem. So that's, again, I just wanted to maybe just go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, well, it's a big difference between existential risks, ones that could literally spell an end to the human species, and other just big global catastrophic risks. So if we're talking merely about big global catastrophic risks, then I think pandemics would rank high up there, nuclear war as well, which is very unlikely. It looks in the most recent models to literally cause human extinction, but it would cause wide devastation.
So, but Nick, do you think we're incentivized enough to sort of take steps to block these type of potentially catastrophic risks? Are we seeing anything that resembles something that is actually serious that could prevent, the end of the world as we know it?
I think the first step, if we really wanted to do something about this, would be to invest more in understanding what risks are real and what would be the most cost-effective countermeasures. At the moment, we did a little literature survey just recently, and there's actually more research on the dung beetle than there is on human extinction risk, just to give you some general sense of where academic attention has been focused.
That's sort of terrifying. That's sort of,
speaking,
That's sort of...
You could easily double the total amount of effort we're devoting to trying to understand what the threats are to our species. Then, in light of that understanding, you could then design, targeted intervention to counter different kinds of risks.
What about steps? Sorry, Nick. I just want to get Ray back in here real quick. Ray, what about steps to prevent, situations like we saw in Russia just recently? What do we need to do to prevent something on a smaller scale, like an asteroid collision or a near-Earth object? Are we taking steps in the right direction there? Don't we have missile defense systems that could prevent potentially a giant asteroid from crashing to Earth?
No, nothing right now. We are cataloging potentially Earth-threatening asteroids. There are some simple experiments taking place. There's one coming up where you hit a small asteroid and see how you can change its momentum or motion. This is rocket science. It's basic physics, building a big enough vehicle. You don't have to blow it up like Bruce Willis did. You just have to deflect its motion slightly. It's well within our technical capability. It would send insurance policy for mankind. I do get cynical, though, because you think of issues like global warming. If asteroid defense becomes a political issue and people say scientists are crying chicken little, I mean, I can see a scientist testifying before Congress, and he says, well, there's a 1 in 50 chance, 1 in 100 chance, and he might be laughed away given the high level of science illiteracy in this country. But it's important to buy that insurance policy and develop the infrastructure to catalog and then deflect and do experiments in deflecting potential hazardous asteroids to Earth.
I want to end the segment here by going back to George. George, we do have a comment from Aposito1 who says, this is an ideal segment to watch before one goes to sleep, tongue-in-cheek. So on a lighter note, you've written this post about the 7 best-case scenarios for the future of humanity. Why don't you walk us through some of them?
For sure. And that's actually precisely why I put the piece together, because it's easy to get all doom and gloomy and think that we are, in fact, going to do ourselves in. So I wanted to, parse or piece together some, actual plausible scenarios that might not be obviously catastrophic or apocalyptic. And the first one that I put down on the list was status quo, which is not something that most futurists want to hear, but it's something that I do believe we need to start thinking about. I think Bill Joy was one of the first to articulate technological relinquishment, which is the idea that we should probably maybe give up on certain technological paths and avenues, and just for the sake of self-preservation. So I did put down status quo as the first one. You'll have to remind me about some of the other ones. I think
sure. Let's run through these together. A bright green Earth is number 2.
Again, this is in reaction to, I think, a lot of the environmentalism that goes on these days, which tends to have a ludistic streak to it, which is the idea that all technological development is bad. I think bright green futurism is this idea that we can, in fact, rework the planet in such a way that would be incredibly sustainable, be verdant, to be beautiful, ecologically friendly. Even the nature of the various ecologies on the planet could be fine-tuned in very specific ways. We could engage in weather control and other sorts of things. So I do think as well we need to be somewhat optimistic and adventurous even when it comes to how we can reshape this planet for the better. In fact, even improve upon what nature did and kind of do a nature 2.0.
I'd like to jump in and say we should also think about reshaping other planets. The talk of terraforming Mars. It sounds like science fiction, but if you're worried about the survival of humanity, we need to become an extraterrestrial civilization.
And that's actually number 4 on George's list, to go boldly where no one's gone before.
Yeah, I mean, we have to get off this planet. Right now, all our eggs are in one basket, as I noted in the article. And we were talking about existential risks. I mean, if we're on this planet simply, as we are today, we're all done for. I think that's one of the fundamental problems when it does come to our addressing of existential risks. And Stephen Hawking himself has admitted that we have to think about venturing beyond here, even if it's just for that purpose. But I also think it will fulfill kind of part of the human mandate, which is to continue to explore our physical space, to explore the scientific space, and even just to further what it means to be a human and post-human and venture out into the cosmos. So I think that's I'm definitely on board with that. And kind of the converse to that is the other item I have on that, or the inverse to that is the exploration of inner space, which is the potential for merging with our machines, living a sort of digital existence in computer substrate, a kind of a matrix-like existence, which again would introduce an entirely new universe unto itself, one that's arguably even larger than the universe that we have in the physical space, both in terms of what's there to explore and what the kinds of things that we can experience. So that's definitely another, I think, would be another positive outcome if we manage to avoid extinction.
And in the interest of time, I'd recommend that everybody jumps into the resource well directly below the video, and you can check out the rest of George's scenarios for a happier ending on the planet Earth. Before I say goodbye to you guys, I want to read one more comment from Emphatico, who says, "We all need to be candid here, one way or the other. The days of our species are numbered. About 98% of all species that have never trodden the Earth have gone extinct. We aren't going to survive that same fate." Well, you know what? At least in the meantime, we can all watch HuffPost Live together and have these good conversations. So I do want to say thanks to Ray, Nick, James, and George. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I hope it's one that we can continue to have here on HuffPost Live. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
All the best to you guys. And to all of you, stick around. We've got more HuffPost Live coming up, and the Earth ain't going to end before the next segment.